Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic, sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their timeless and extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. There are more than 165 awesome interviews in the AA Recovery Interviews podcast series. Listen to every hour-long episode wherever you get your podcasts, or at the website aarecoveryinterviews.com. Each story is a powerful testimony of the recovery available to all in AA. This is an Encore episode of my interview with Brent F., originally released January 19th, 2022. Brent has been a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous since November of 2018. This show features my good friend Brent F. We actually recorded it in person immediately after a men's meeting that we both attend. It's in that meeting that I became reacquainted with Brent when he last got sober 3 years ago. I'd actually met him in 1996 when he first attempted to get sober. But like so many others, it took him several attempts to fully embrace AA and do the work necessary to achieve solid and contented sobriety. Those earlier attempts at sobriety included significant stints in AA over the years, during which time he went to meetings and got to know members of the fellowship. But his half-hearted efforts and a belief that he could still smoke pot thwarted his attempts at sustained or meaningful sobriety. He slipped time and time again. Though his marriage and job remained largely intact throughout the years, his slow descent into hopelessness and despair were marked indicators that he indeed needed help. It took 2 interventions, 3 treatment centers, multiple forays in AA, and a threatened divorce before Brent's desire to stay sober finally surfaced from within. It was at that point that he experienced the spiritual impetus to get sober for good and all, and that meant no more marijuana, prescription drugs, or alcohol. In the 3 years of Brent's current sobriety, he has worked the program as suggested while staying in the middle of the herd. He goes to daily meetings, studies the Big Book, works the 12 steps with his sponsor and sponsees, prays, and does service work for his AA groups. And, unlike earlier periods of faint sobriety, he ignores marijuana's beguilement as a harmless threat to his sobriety. It's an approach that has worked successfully for many people with whom Brent surrounds himself. I found significant similarities in Brent's story with my own, especially those pertaining to marijuana's persistent, baffling, and insidious allure. You may find such similarities as well. So, clear your schedule for the next hour of AA Recovery Interviews with my good friend and AA brother, Brent F.
I'm an alcoholic. My name is Brent.
Hi, Brent. Thanks for joining me today on the AA Recovery Interviews podcast.
Thank you.
What's really beautiful about this particular interview right now is that you and I just came out of one of my favorite meetings in the city of Houston, and you've been coming to this meeting for the past 3 years pretty regularly?
3 years this time.
3 years this time, yeah, because you used to come here before.
Yep.
You've been sober 3 years, and what's your sobriety date?
My sobriety date's 11/28 of 18. So 3 years and a month or two.
Wow, that's amazing. Seems like just yesterday you came in.
It is.
But it wasn't your first time in, though, right?
No, it was not. In fact, the first time I met you was in here probably in 1996.
That's amazing. 96. So what was going on in your life in 1996 prior to getting to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous?
Well, I was on a good trajectory for my career.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and I had, a year prior, had our first child.
Mm-hmm.
She had a job. She was working. I was working. She worked for a architecture design firm, and they worked some late hours on deadlines. And I had a responsibility one night to keep an eye on our 1-year-old daughter. Like usual, I had some drinks that evening. That night, I decided to drink some whiskey, which sometimes affects me differently. And I had a few shots and thought it'd be a good idea to close my eyes for a minute or two. And the next thing I know, I'm waking up to my wife shaking me, "Wake up." And she apparently had been, I had put my daughter in the bed next to me.
Yeah.
And basically passed out.
Oh, man.
And she had been calling for 30 minutes or so, and I had not been answering. And she was, of course, freaked out. She came home, told me to wake up. She was certainly aggravated. And I awoke. My daughter was crying next to me in the bed. And the first thing I said to her is, because she told me I'd been calling for an hour. And the first thing I said to her was, well, if you not let the phone ring so much, the baby probably wouldn't have woken up. So,
oh, my gosh.
It was clear to me at that point that my drinking was becoming a problem.
Yeah.
So I agreed to make an appointment with the doctor. And I remember him, he was a young guy. Apparently his family were alcoholics. He was so hardcore. He's like, you're gonna die. Alcohol is gonna kill you. And, I was just, look, man, I just drink too much. I was still in the, hey, I'm a partier. This is what I do. This is what I've been doing for, 20 plus years. Mm-hmm. And he was really serious and it did not like my laissez-faire attitude towards it.
Sure.
He suggested that I go to a meeting that night, and I, being accommodating, I did, because my wife wanted me to really dig in. And I went to that meeting, and there were about 7 people that were really old. They're probably my age now, but
yeah, right.
They seemed really old.
Yeah, yeah.
And they were old timers, and I can't remember the whole thing other than me thinking that these are not my people.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that.
I'm not at all like them. They had various degrees of waking up shaking, drinking all day, significant consequences from drinking, and none of that had happened to me at this point. So I left there disenchanted with the concept of an AA meeting, but in order to get the heat off my back, I went to a meeting that next day, and when I walked in there, it was a different mix of people. Yeah, because there were people my age as well as old timers, and it turned out I recognized somebody I knew from school.
Oh, wow!
At that meeting, and so I started going back to that. I asked that fellow to be my sponsor, and I think we got through maybe step 3 that I remember going through with him. Because I have it written down in my first book. I wrote step 3 in handwriting, which he had me do, and didn't do much past that I recall.
Were you just not earnest in your attempt, or were you thinking that you just do the bare minimum and get the heck out of there? What was your attitude?
I didn't really get what was going on, in a sense. I was really of the attitude, I drink too much. If I come to these meetings, and hang out with these people, I'm not going to drink anymore. I didn't understand the book when I read it at that time. And, 30, 60, 90 days, I picked up chips and I was staying sober. Didn't at all grasp the concept of higher power being involved other than we talk about him. And I did say my 3rd step prayer from time to time. And I had some friends, other people I knew, from outside world I'd met in there. And, so there was a little camaraderie. And I made it to a year and 3 days. And I went out and had a drink.
That year period, that's when I must have met you for the first time.
Yes, sir.
Because I was going to some of the same meetings you were. I don't know that I remember what your attitude was like. I remember knowing you and knowing your name and everything, but I didn't know just how serious you were about getting sober or any of that. Were you putting on airs, or were you really trying to work the program?
I don't really remember my mindset back then. What I can tell you is I still didn't like the fact that I had to call myself an alcoholic. Didn't feel like an alcoholic because a lot of my stories were different. I had not had any negative consequences other than the wrath of my wife. So I was in it to do it. I felt good about it, but I had, what the book calls is the lurking notion.
Sure. Yeah.
Perhaps if I can, make enough money, retire, whatever, then I can put the old carpet slippers on. All right. And maybe I can drink. And party like a gentleman. So I never got the first step, in a sense. I felt that my actions were keeping me sober.
Yeah.
All right. And my actions being going to meetings, getting a sponsor like y'all told me to, and that's it.
There's that disconnect between, on that first step, between admitting we were powerless and accepting that fact. And that was my main problem when I was new in the program, was I would admit the first 3 steps all day long if that's what it took to be a part of AA, but I didn't believe it.
That is absolutely, where I was coming from.
Yeah.
In the unmanageability portion, I didn't even remember that part of the first step.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, because I was managing my life well. I just had this drinking problem.
Yeah, well, you were a successful businessman at the time, weren't you?
I was in, like I say, I was
Doing
36, maybe, no, actually, I think I was 32, and I was really finding my own in business. So this was holding me back in my personal life, all right? It was not holding me back in the work life. I had not had any health consequences, but it was causing certain tension at home. And I knew I drank too much, all right? I knew perhaps that I probably couldn't stop drinking, but I didn't want to. It was my good friend until they told me that I needed to. They, the doctor, my parents, whoever, said, you need to stop drinking.
Were the people in the AA meetings you went to, were they being helpful or cooperative, or were they giving you feedback to the way you were acting, or were you able to pretty much go your own way while you were inside the rooms?
I did my own thing. I did not hang out early. I did not stick around late. I did not go to lunch. I did not go to dinner. I went to my meetings and I went home.
And was your sponsor someone you talked to regularly, or was it just sponsor name and occasional interaction with?
We talked fairly regularly, and he took me to a number of different meetings around town.
Yeah.
But as time went by, that the frequency of our visits and conversations certainly waned. And, I wasn't doing whatever it takes to stay sober. I was just doing, whatever it takes at this period of time. And in my mind, I was doing enough to keep myself sober.
One of the things that I hear and have heard a lot in the interviews was, and it was true for me too, actually quitting drinking like you did for a year becomes a handy excuse why you're not an alcoholic. Because if you can stop for a year, then you must be able to control your drinking. Did you get that sense? I
absolutely believe that it was not a coincidence that I made it to a year and 3 days. Because I'm pretty sure I said to myself, okay, you stop for a year. Now you know what the deal is.
Right.
You can control it. All right. And so I went back into the world and tried to control my drinking. I do not recall the period of time, whether it was a year or 2 years, but my drinking started to aggravate my wife again. And I was drinking too much. I was drinking every day.
During the day or just in the evenings?
Just in the evenings after work. But I'd come home and have, several drinks and, fall asleep in the chair, and she'd have to wake me up to go to bed. And, part of my story is marijuana.
Yeah.
That was really my first drug of choice. And that started in 10th grade in high school. From that point on, I smoked every day. And somewhere during college, I started drinking every day in addition to smoking every day.
I was the same way, as a matter of fact. My substance of choice was marijuana, and I found it right after high school before I went to college. And I got high every single day. And of course, some of the people I was hanging out with for the pot were also drinking, so I got involved in the drinking. Even though I felt like I was sharper and a little bit more in control when I was smoking grass than when I was drinking, I still would oftentimes do both. And, one thing kind of led to the other. And if I couldn't drink, then I could smoke pot. If I couldn't smoke pot, then I would drink. But for the most part, I was able to get enough pot so I could smoke every day.
Right.
Is that your experience?
Yes, there was always pot. And if I ran out, I needed it. So don't let anybody tell you pot wasn't addictive, because I was certainly addicted to it. What I found out somewhere along the way, and I don't know if it was in high school or in college, and don't tell this to the kids, but if I drank a little bit before I smoked, the high from the weed was more intense. So I started drinking before I smoked. And that was in the evenings. I still smoked in the mornings and the like, but after school, I'd come home, I'd pour a drink, and I'd start drinking. And it was a cocktail or two, small drinks, and then I'd smoke. And then we'd go out in college to the bars and drink all night. Come home, smoke, and start all over again the next day.
And just do it day after day.
Right. But some point along that journey, drinking was an everyday occurrence in the evenings.
Were you a blackout drinker?
I was not. I am certainly what they call a chronic versus a periodic. It made me feel good.
Yeah.
And, as people say, it was the solution. The weed and the alcohol were the solution to make me breathe easier, relax, unwind from the day. So when I got into the work world, that's what I wanted and I felt I needed at the end of every day to have that unwind period. All right. And the problem is when you start falling asleep in your chair and your wife has to wake you up to go to bed every night, it becomes a problem for her.
Right, for her, not for you. Yeah.
Right.
Now, was she the only one noticing this as a problem? Were there others? How about your kids? What was there?
No, they were still real young.
Okay.
So after I got sober in 96, right after my wife found out she was pregnant. So we had our son in November of 96, our second child. And I was clean and sober. My wife's mom had leukemia, and she died in early 96, and my wife was very thankful that I got sober during that period of time. So I was there, I was present when her mom passed away. And so she was very happy with the way things were going. I, on the other hand, still missed it. And, consequently, a year later, I started drinking again.
Did it become self-evident at any point that you were doing this because she wanted you to do it, not because you wanted to do it?
Absolutely.
So it was 100% because she wanted it, not you?
Correct.
It's hard to keep up any kind of long-term commitment with that going on because sooner or later the other person will come to expect that you want the outcome that you're getting from not drinking, and they want to believe that you feel the way they believe, and when you don't, that's where the friction starts, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And, I'm certain that's why I didn't stay sober. If you fast forward to 2018, I had every one of the bedevilments that they talk about in the book, all right? I didn't care if I woke up anymore every day. My life was miserable. I was doing okay still. I had some business traumas along the way, which I had a hard time climbing out of that self-pity, and consequently I started drinking more and more. But I got to that point where, I was a prey to misery and depression. I really did feel like I was sinking and there was no way out.
So this period from the time you started drinking again after that year sober to 2018, we're talking 25 years, aren't we?
So there was a period in the middle, and, that merits discussion. So I came back into the program around 98-ish, and I stayed sober. I worked all the steps. I got a new sponsor. I hung out with a good group of people, and I was part of the fellowship. I worked the steps to a degree, in a sense. I did the 4-step. I did a 9th step. Not sure I did a good 6 and 7, and I'm certain I didn't do a good 1. Still never really understood the concept of a higher power. And I tried to work the 12-step and work with another person, but I really didn't feel comfortable doing it because I'm not sure I knew how to work the program.
Right.
And it seemed inconvenient. And so I gave up on that. The person didn't stay sober. I didn't seek other sponsees. And I probably didn't have much to give them other than I now could say I'm part of the club. I've worked the steps. It's evident that I didn't do a good step one because I was having some anxiety and sleeping issues. I went to a psychiatrist. He had prescribed Ambien for sleeping, and I started taking Ambien on a daily basis. And so about 3 years into it, I found that if you took a little extra Ambien, you could actually not go to sleep and stay up and feel like you were more productive. And I'd start writing emails and doing work that I totally didn't remember the next day. You know, that's kind of a side effect of Ambien that you can, forget what you were doing.
So were you addicted to the Ambien?
I'm pretty sure you could say I was addicted. So my friends in the program got together. We had a intervention, if you will, at my doctor's office. And, they convinced me I was addicted to Ambien and that I needed some help. And I checked into the treatment center for Ambien, and they detoxed me for a little less than a week, I think it was. And I went to their IOP program and came out clean from Ambien. The reason, to back up, they had the intervention on the Ambien, because one night after taking a little extra Ambien, a buddy came over to my house, and I decided we should go out to a club, and I had a beer that night. And I told everybody, look, I had a beer, I was taking too much Ambien, and so that's what precipitated me going into treatment for that. We qualified it as a relapse.
And this was after how long?
Probably about 3 years or so.
Okay, so from 98 to 2001?
2001-ish, yeah.
2001. So in that period of time, you were actively participating in AA?
Yes, I was going to meetings, going to dinners after, hanging out at Starbucks with program guys.
And how was your confidence level, your belief level at that time? Were you still feeling resistant to it or feeling like you hadn't really gotten the first step? Or were you still trying to manage your life?
I didn't know I hadn't gotten the first step at that period of time. I felt like I was working the program adequately.
Okay.
What I can tell you in retrospect is there was really no higher power interaction at that point in time. And there still was, I wish I could still be drinking. But I had been feeling good about the program.
Sure.
And feeling good about myself, that I was now in the deal for several years.
Yeah.
And, I was proud to be part of AA. But that powerless thing, I had some knee pain, so I was taking a little Vicodin here and there, probably not taking it as prescribed, but I wasn't seeking out other prescriptions.
And this is after?
This was kind of during that Ambien period.
When they said that you needed to consider that a relapse, did you literally come back in to get a new...
I picked up another Desire chip.
Picked up another Desire chip in 2001?
About 2001.
2001. So you'd stayed sober for 3 years, but you were dabbling in the different prescription drugs during that time.
Towards the end of that period, about 2 years into it, when I had some knee surgery, I was taking some painkillers, but I wasn't drinking. So as far as I was concerned, I was working the program.
Yeah.
And the Ambien and take a little extra Ambien, still working the program.
Did anybody ever confront you on that? I mean, before the intervention or during that period of time, the people who knew you best?
They didn't know. My business partner who was in the program at that time, he kind of started seeing about the Ambien thing because I'd be falling asleep while we were working late night at the house. And, occasionally he'd recognize that I couldn't remember some shit.
Okay.
So,
oh, brother.
And so then, I was outed with the beer, when I went out that one night and had a beer. Pretty much came clean with that. And I agreed I needed to re-up the game. So we started over. And, I stayed sober for about 4.5 years after that.
Okay, so from 2001 to about 2005, you're sober once again.
Yeah, 2005, 2006. I'm not exactly sure of the date.
Now, were you continuing to use the same sponsor and going to the same meetings, or had you changed that up?
No, it was all the same meetings, a lot of which we still go to today. You know, I was ingrained in the program. Did not pick up a sponsee. This was the period when I had a sponsee, when I tried to have a sponsee in the second go-round period. But I was not reworking the steps. I wasn't doing a daily inventory, but I was in the program.
So you were selective about the various things that we do to enrich our lives with sobriety versus just staying dry or just staying sober without any of the gifts. You were going to the meetings. You were trying to sponsor somebody, right?
Right.
You had a sponsor. Were you calling your sponsor very frequently?
Yeah, we stayed in touch. We went to meetings together. We went to coffees. At one point, I hired my sponsor, and he was working for me for a while.
How'd that work out?
It ended up not so good. We got crossways on a transaction, and he left, and we didn't talk much after that.
That's tough.
Which is certainly a good lesson to learn. To be in a position of authority over your sponsor is probably not a great relationship.
I get that. So I'm curious about what you were feeling deep down in your heart of hearts during this, third attempt at longer-term sobriety, the 4.5 years. What were you feeling deep down about what you were doing? Were you satisfied from a emotional or spiritual standpoint, or was there still something in there that you just could not bring yourself to do or feel or experience?
I was feeling satisfied emotionally. I really felt like I was on a good beam, if you will. In retrospect, I can see how my ego, as things were going well, and now that I'm doing all the right things, my ego started to get enormous. And with that, my selfishness or my grandiosity, or I felt I was giving people some jobs, I was helping people, and this charitability was service.
Yeah.
But was I doing good for nothing in return? Not so much. So I really was feeling my Wheaties towards the end of this 4 to 5 year period.
If you, knowing what you know today, were to meet the Brent at that period and you noticed what was going on with him, what would you say to that guy?
You're not the king of the world.
Was that coming out at that time, that you exuding that as the kind of personality you wanted to put out in front of people?
I was the smartest person in the room.
Really? Even in an AA room?
This is probably more in my day-to-day life. In an AA room, I was the smartest person in the room, but not the most wise as relates to the program. I knew that.
Right.
I knew there were people that had more wisdom about staying sober and about spirituality and the like. But I was still smarter than anybody, what I'll call in real life. I don't know if that's the case.
No, I get that. Was it a smugness?
No, it was just an overconfidence.
Overconfidence, okay.
Which caused a rift between me and my AA business partner protege, because I wasn't willing to listen to another point of view.
Interesting. How were things at home during this 4.5 year period?
They were good. The Ambien years caused an issue. My wife, of course, was nervous and scared again that I had relapsed. But I bounced back pretty well deep into the program. And, we had, I think my 35th birthday, I guess this was early on, was all AA people.
Yeah.
My family and AA people. And we were enmeshed in the herd, so to speak. But there was no connection with the higher power. There was no spirituality. I was still under the belief, if I made enough money and was able to relax on the business growth, then I would have time, to study spirituality and become more spiritual and to have a higher concept of a higher power.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying AA Recovery interviews, I invite you to check out my latest audiobook, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a relaxing yet meaningful and engaging way to listen to the Big Book anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, iTunes, or Amazon. While you're there, search for my other audiobook, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories from the first and or second editions missing from the third and fourth editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's an engaging audiobook that brings these stories to life for AA members who've never seen them. These timeless testimonials were originally cut to make room for newer stories in the third and fourth editions. But their vitally important messages of hope are as meaningful today as they were when they were first published. Many listeners will hear these stories for the very first time. It's also available from Amazon as a Kindle book or in paperback if you'd like to read along. You're going to love it. And we're back. So sobriety didn't have the priority that it really should have in a person's life. You were putting other things in front of them as justification or as, let's say, delaying factors to getting to the real meat of the program at some later point.
That really just changed, over time. So when I got back into the program, sobriety was number one. Because it's ingrained in us, you must be sober first for everything to follow, all right? And, once I got to that third year and fourth year, it's like, well, my powerlessness waned as I became more powerful. So the priority of sobriety was, it's a given, all right? You can't drink, you can't smoke anymore.
Right.
But that's not, and we're going to still go to our meetings, but that's not going to be number one. And that became evident as my daily meetings turned to 3 times a week meetings, turned to just Saturday morning, and you could see the progression that everybody has. Stopped calling my sponsor.
How long of a period was that? At what point did you notice yourself letting up on any particular facet of your program?
Probably 2 or 3 years into it. Probably when my sponsor and I split, I stopped going to as many meetings. But there were still, a frequency of meetings, but it did, towards the end, it certainly fell off to 1 meeting a week.
Would you say that then, from what your experience was, that the importance of meetings was never overstated?
No, I think meetings are important for lots of reasons. Number one, as you start reducing your meeting, you just hear over and over and over. As you start reducing your meeting count, you become in more danger. And when anybody who relapses, you ask them what went wrong. Well, I stopped going to meetings, stopped calling my sponsor, stopped reading the Big Book. So I think having a solid meeting schedule is critical to staying sober.
So what year are we at now?
Probably 2005-ish.
2005-ish. You've just completely let up on the program to the extent of fewer meetings. Were you?
I was still hanging with program people.
Yeah. Were they starting to notice a difference in Brent as a participating brother in the program, or were you able to keep it up, keep those friendships up as if you were actively engaged all the time?
I don't know if they noticed. I will tell you, towards that period of time, 2005, 2006, the way I relapsed was I was out hunting with some old buddies.
Yeah.
And they had passed some weed around the campfire, and I took a heat of some weed. I felt like I was missing out. Weed was becoming a little more passé.
Yeah.
And so I started smoking. And a week later, I had asked my buddy, hey, can you get me some of that? And very quickly, I was back to smoking on a daily basis. Now, my AA buddies knew that I was smoking, and I was still coming to meetings, having had smoked. My argument was that the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking, and I was not drinking.
Well, the desire to stop, it doesn't necessarily mean you have stopped. One of the women I interviewed early on in the podcast series, she was going to AA meetings for like 5 years, was drinking after the meetings, but she wanted to stop. But it took until the point at which she finally did. The desire to stop was there. So you found a way to justify or rationalize it.
That's exactly the case. I was like, look, I don't want to drink anymore. I get it. Alcohol was a problem for me. All right, but this weed is a whole different animal.
Yeah,
it changes the way I feel, but there's no negative consequences from it, other than my wife was now getting aggravated about it too. All my buddies in AA didn't want to play with me anymore because I was not sober. And, basically it was like my sober group kind of dissolved.
Did they feel let down, or did you get the sense from them that they were...
Oh, yeah. They had an intervention. They had a pot intervention for me at my house.
The same guys from the previous intervention, or a few?
A couple were the same guys. A couple was my business partner. A couple heavy hitters. And I was appalled that they'd get together at my house, to have an intervention for pot, because nobody has an intervention for pot. It's like, what are y'all thinking?
Yeah, it's so benign, right?
Nobody. Why would you do that? And so I got up, I walked out.
You walked out of your own intervention?
I did, for the weed. And keep in mind, my ego is
sky high,
the top of the level.
Right.
It's like, y'all don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Y'all are being stupid. I got this under control. And so my involvement in the program pretty much disintegrated. And the pot got in the way of my business partnership, where in a sense we got divorced.
Right.
Not my wife, my business partner. And very shortly after that, my wife said we need to get a divorce. So we were separated for 4 months. I was pretty miserable during that time. I did not drink for at least a year after all this went down. I stayed dry from alcohol. I was smoking weed, but I was committed. Hey man, I'm not going to drink. I know that's bad. And so my wife and I were separated. I was very miserable, lonely. Our kids were 6 and whatever age. And, they'd come over and visit for a few hours. One day we went to an Astros game, and all I could do was sit there and cry that I didn't have my family anymore.
So you were living elsewhere?
Yeah, I went to an apartment for 4 months. And, I begged her to come back. I'll do better. All right, I'm not drinking. And the saint that she is, she saw how miserable I was and let me come back in.
But you never said to her, I won't smoke pot?
I may have told her I'll try to do better.
Okay.
But I don't think there was a hard and fast, I got to stop.
Yeah, so you didn't want to stop at that point.
I didn't really want to stop. I just wanted my family back.
Okay. So the family comes back.
The family comes back at 4 months. I continued to smoke pot till about 2008. And somewhere in the 2006 to 2008, I started drinking again. So I didn't have any program. I now wasn't going to any meetings.
So it was just a natural progression at that point.
Absolutely.
Your wife threw you out, and then you came back after 4 months, but your program was dissolving around you because you wanted to smoke pot and wanted acceptance in the rooms from people that you were sober even though you were smoking pot. And there are some rooms out there where people will do that. I get it. But I've known men who've come into this very meeting room that we're in tonight who tried to convince the group when they would share that it was okay for them to smoke pot. They had some kind of special dispensation. And it's not so much that people were ragging on them or saying negative things in the meeting or whatever. It's just that the atmosphere of the entire fellowship shifted for that person. Because a lot of us who are also pot smokers, who consider sobriety, meaning all the different substances, it's hard to sit there and watch a guy who's still doing the substance that you want to do, but no, you can't do, but it's okay for him. There's just something that doesn't feel right about it. Did you get that sense?
I did. And Dan, in fact, was the one that took me aside and said, I can't hang out with you anymore. He said, if you're smoking pot, it's dangerous to my program.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you're a danger to me. If I see you getting along and going to meetings, smoking pot, and everything's hunky dory, I might in my mind think that I can do that too.
Yeah, why can Brent do it and I can't?
Right. And so he says, I can't be with you. I can't condone it. I don't want to see that.
Yeah, I could hear Dan saying that too, the type of sobriety that he has.
Right.
So you started drinking again.
I did.
In about 2006 to 2008 period.
Right. 2006 or so, I started drinking again.
Uh-huh.
2008, because my business relationship had gotten tumultuous,
Mm-hmm.
I started having some serious anxiety. And when I smoked, I think the weed might have been getting stronger too. I started having these panic attacks. And so at some point in there, I stopped smoking pot. It was tripping me out. Before it was always a measured response.
Yeah.
It worked the same way every time, but it stopped working for me. And it made me scared, because some days I would have a bad reaction to it, and some days it's okay, but I never knew how it was going to work.
Did you ever try to use the alcohol to counteract the anxiety that you were having, or the panic attacks that were being caused, let's say, by the pot?
Yeah, that my drinking increased because of that.
So your drinking increased to get through the panic.
Right, absolutely. And so at some point I said, look, I can't smoke anymore. This is not working anymore for me. But drinking is now my good buddy again.
I get it.
And that works every time the same way every time. So from 2006 or 7,
yeah,
I drank all the way till 2018.
Wow, that whole time.
Yeah. So I was out about 13 years.
These are parts of your story I've never heard, but it's amazing how much exposure you had and how much participation you had in AA to be out for that period of time. What were you thinking about AA? Did you ever think about AA when you were going through that period?
No, I did not look back after.
Did you not want to have anything to do with it, or you were done with AA, or?
I tried it, didn't work, didn't make me feel better. At least I didn't remember that it made me feel better.
Yeah.
I could not remember the benefits of it.
Yeah.
It's strange. So I feel bad for folks who are forced into the program, or come in because their parents, their wife, their loved ones tell them to come in. Young people who are there, or come here from DWIs, the judge sent them there. I feel that's the way I was. They talk about hitting your bottom. All right, I had no idea what that meant. I thought my bottom was my daughter crying in the bed next to me. So I see how hard it can be for newcomers who have not got to that point of desperation yet. I was not at a point of desperation.
Was it because you hadn't lost enough, or your health was still good, or?
It was all of those things. I was not in any pain other than some emotional pain. But in 2018, I didn't want to go anywhere. I just wanted to sit in my backyard and smoke and drink.
You were back to smoking pot at that point?
For a few months, I started smoking pot in the middle of 2018.
Okay.
Again, it worked for a little bit, and then it started waffling on me. So it was not really my go-to. Again, it was a supplement, but alcohol was, daily, lots of alcohol.
Yeah.
I was now waking up in the middle of the night, 3 a.m, having to go to the kitchen, take a couple chugs out of the bottle to go back to bed. I didn't want to go into work. Anxiety and depression and self-pity were all on me. It was thick. And I was really starting to get some serious panic attacks where my face would flush. People from work would call, or I'd get a voicemail, and I would just start sweating. I didn't want to be available for anybody. I didn't want you to tell me to do something, because I just didn't want to go out into the world. I would set all my appointments up for Thursday afternoon between 1 and 3 o'clock. All the appointments for the week. If you called me on a Monday, I'm too busy till Thursday.
I had a woman that I recently interviewed tell me that her anxiety and the panic attacks that she had from similar types of situations that you're talking about created agoraphobia for her, where she just didn't want to be around people at all.
It was close to that.
Was it?
It was close to that. You know, we'd make plans to go out to dinner with people. And the night of, and I had full intention. Yeah, that sounds fun. Let's get out. Let's go. You know, I could go drink there. It'll be all right. But the night of the deal, man, I don't want to go. I just want to stay home in my backyard. I don't want anybody screwing with me.
Well, you know what's interesting about your story, Brent, is that there was a period in time where your wife's desire to have you stop was sufficient for you to stop and go to AA. And you had a relationship that supported that particular premise, that you would go and she would stop being concerned or nagging or whatever she did. What was her demeanor like during all of these years? Or was she too busy raising the kids? Did she ever get on you again to stop?
Sure. It varied. You know, there'd be some pressure and then I'd play it off. And tell her, I understand, I'm working on it. I'll try to drink a little less. And, you know, I got away with that for 13 years or so. You know, for the last year or two, you know, 2016 to 18, she was really miserable with my drinking. It was palpable. You know, I'd come to bed with a drink in my hand with the ice clinking in the glass. She would be dead asleep, you know, at 10 o'clock. I'd be coming in at midnight or something. She'd hear that ice clinking, wake straight up. You know, what are you having another drink for? Why do you need another drink? I don't need another drink. I want another drink. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And I'd put it next to my bed, and I'd get in bed and watch TV for a little bit. I'd wake up the next morning, and that full drink was sitting next to me. So she went to bed aggravated many nights. She would check the bottle every morning to see how much I drank the night before. And this is part of her story, because she's devoted to Al-Anon now. So
she's a devoted member of Al-Anon.
Yeah.
Did she go into Al-Anon before you got sober again?
No, she had gone down on many years prior.
Yeah.
For about 3 meetings, and bought the books, put them on the shelf, and never really went back. But when I went into treatment in 18, she went to her first Al-Anon meeting again, and has gone every day since.
So she's become a regular.
Yeah.
You know what's ironic about that, Brent, is that she becomes a regular after you get sober, where for a lot of Al-Anons, and I was in Al-Anon for a period of time, a number of years ago, the time it's most important, or not least important, let's say, is when the person is still engaging in the behavior and you're trying to survive it, and Al-Anon is teaching you the skills to survive the active alcoholic out there. So while you're out there drinking everything, she leaves the book on the shelf, you get sober, she gets involved. It's actually a beautiful story, but I'm sure she must have been miserable for a lot of years in there.
She was, and you could feel it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't going to end well.
So were the kids grown by this point, by 2018?
Yeah, so I was, drinking during their high school years pretty much.
Yeah.
And before that. But they really knew I was an alcoholic when they were in high school. They understood, They understood when we went on vacations, Dad says, I got to stop at the liquor store before we go to the hotel,
Yeah.
And I'd feel bad if it was a 4-day vacation that after 2 days, I'd have to leave them and go to the liquor store again to resupply.
How many kids have you got?
I've got 2.
Two.
27 and 25.
Are either one of them involved with any kind of substance abuse or alcoholism that you know of?
They do some social drinking and some social smoking these days. So.
Yeah, I get that. I've got the same kind of thing with my 3, and my daughter doesn't drink or smoke or anything. My 2 sons, 31 and 29, every time I see them order a drink when we go out to dinner, it's like I want to say, wait a second, but then I have to remember, wait, they're not the alcoholic at the table here. They're ordering one drink, and that's all they want.
Right.
But it's hard not to want to project onto them, just that fear of them turning into what I was for all those years.
Oh man, it's hard.
Did you ever get that sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. How do you deal with that when you feel that way?
For a while, it was like, hey man, let me tell you all the pitfalls. You know, all the bad things that happened to me. You know, perhaps this isn't a good plan. But somebody told me that, look, how would you have taken it?
I know.
You know, when you were drinking and starting to smoke.
I know.
And certainly whatever anybody said to me when I started smoking weed or drinking, I wasn't listening to.
Yeah, I'm the same way. And plus the days and the opportunities to have said something that might have had a little bit more impact kind of came and went.
Right.
The best that I can do for my kids is stay sober and be a model of a sober man and a sober dad and a sober person in the community.
That's exactly right. The advice I got was, back off on telling them what to do. That's certainly good Al-Anon advice. But let them know if they think they're having a problem that you're a resource for them, to talk to.
So 2018, you come back. Things have really ramped up in terms of the anxiety and the drinking and the business difficulties. Was all that kind of coming to a head in 2018?
It came to a head in about 2013.
Wow, so you spent 5 years in that quagmire?
Yeah, and it got progressively worse. Sad, self-pity, couldn't dig myself out of a hole, starting in 2013. And by 2018, I could see no way out. I assumed there was no way out. It was never going to get better again. And all I wanted to do was, ease the pain.
Yeah, I've known people who've contemplated suicide.
I didn't contemplate suicide, but I really was okay if I didn't wake up the next day.
Yeah, I get it. Just kind of a passive way of getting
exactly
getting
the same. Maybe that's the answer. If I just don't wake up, it'll be okay. I've got life insurance.
Yeah.
Everybody will be okay with that.
So did you have some kind of spiritual experience before you came back in 2018? Was there a particular moment of clarity for you before you finally said, I got to get back into AA. I got to stay sober. I got to do this?
A couple of events that precipitated it. Well, my dad passed away in early 2018. So there was a little grief process there. I say that like it's a minimal event. I don't think that was traumatic, serious trauma. He was 92 years old.
Yeah.
Certainly I was sad. But a few months after that, my psychiatrist of about 6 years killed himself.
Ooh.
Right. And he was the guy treating me for my anxiety and my panic. And by the way, I was back on Ambien. I was on Klonopin. I was on Trazodone. I was on speed in the morning to wake me up, all right, with Klonopin on the side to limit my anxiety.
And booze in between.
And booze in between. I drank a ton at night, taking Ambien, taking Trazodone to go to sleep. Needless to say, he was not an addiction specialist. He passed away, and that was really a catalyst for me starting to crack up.
Kind of like a wake-up call? Or?
Well, kind of like I didn't have anybody now to talk to.
Okay.
My wife is mad at me because I'm drinking all the time.
Right.
I didn't have anywhere to go.
That's tough.
I didn't find out about his passing until I called to make an appointment. They said, oh, by the way, let me have somebody else talk to you.
Oh, no. What a way to find out.
And so I tried to see another doctor. That guy said, well, you probably ought to stop drinking. Like, yeah, but I don't want to go to AA. I've tried that.
Yeah.
He said, well, there's this thing called smart recovery. And I'm like, that doesn't sound like it's for me either. And so I didn't get a good vibe from him. And so a month or so went by, and I called a friend of ours in the program who's connected to the recovery community. I said, look, I need a new psychiatrist. And he gave me the name of a doctor. I called her on the phone. He gave me the number. She said, all right, what medicines are you on? I said, I'm on Klonopin, Trazodone, Ambien. She's like, oh, wait, I can't see you until you're off all of that. So I called my buddy back. And by the way, when I called him the first time, I was crying. I said, look, man, I'm miserable. I'm in a bad place.
Yeah.
I need a new shrink. I'm cracking up. He referred to me as a hot mess when I talked to him. I
can imagine.
So that doctor said she wouldn't see me unless I was got to a baseline. free and clear of drugs. And so I reported back to him. He helped me get an appointment over at the treatment center.
So back to the same treatment center you'd gone to 14 years earlier.
Right. And, I checked in. I checked in with a gym bag and a couple T-shirts, figuring I'd be up there to detox, and then I'd walk out and I'd just come back into AA, and y'all would welcome me with open arms, and I would do the program. And we had a meeting there about 4 days into my stay there with my wife and 2 doctors, my counselor, our buddy from the program. And I told them, my plan was I'm going to finish detoxing, I'm going to leave. And they said, well, that's not our recommended plan for you.
Of course not.
And so they said, look, you got to have just a little willingness. Yeah. Think about it. Be willing to stay. Our plan is residential treatment and the other programs thereafter and aftercare. And so I left that meeting, adamant that I wasn't going to stay. And they had a little process group that morning after the meeting, or the next morning after the meeting. And I showed up to that men's group, and one of our other buddies from the program was leading that meeting. And I had known him outside the program. Our kids went to school together. I never knew he was in the program. And I saw him there. And I said, man, they want me to stay here. I said, I don't want to stay here. And he turned to me and said, man, you got to stay. It's not going to work if you don't stay. And so that was my first kind of God moment, that he put that man in my life right then. And I stayed. And it made a hell of a difference. I mean, I got to go through all the different emotions during that next few weeks, not the least of which was I am totally different than all these people, these youngsters doing heroin, shit like that. It's like, I am not like any of these people.
Yeah.
And after a few weeks, it's like, I am exactly like these people. We all got the same shit. You learn some of the science behind addiction and things like that. You get back into the swing of the program. But, hitting that bottom and hearing about everybody else's bottom and learning about, what the real first step is all about being powerless. Because people came in and we talked and we had meetings in there. And I really kind of felt the first step for the first time. And I realized I never got it before.
Your emotion in the moment right now is an indication of just how powerful it must have been at the time.
Oh, yeah.
When you recognize that man was a godsend. Did that moment of clarity, that God moment with him, it sounds like it changed your entire frame of mind towards everything else.
It did. You've heard me say in a meeting, our buddy who recommended I go there met me when I was up in detox. And I had told him, look, man, I never got the God thing. And he pointed me to the page in the book where it said you have to make the decision whether God is everything or else he's nothing. And I said, well, up to this point, God's done nothing for me. And he turned right to me and said, how's that been working for you? I'm like, well, when you put it that way, it hadn't been working so good. He said, perhaps you should be willing to consider that maybe God's everything. And then 2 days later, I had that God moment. It's like, well, God, maybe there is something out there working for me. So it was really powerful.
It sounds like it. And it was the thing that finally moved you off the dime to be able to do the work.
Absolutely. I was really ready to dig back in. And it's funny that I went on past like 2 or 3 weeks into my stay there, and I showed up to this meeting.
Yeah, I remember.
And you were there, and you said, ask me if I had a sponsor.
Yeah.
I was like, no, not yet. I'm looking. You said, hold on. You called my guy over and said, hey, this would be a good sponsor.
Yeah.
And he's still my sponsor today.
Yeah, that's so beautiful.
And that was kind of a God thing, too, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it definitely is for me, and I know it was for him, and he is an amazing man. And I've seen the quality of his sobriety grow and improve since being your sponsor. And I've seen you as I've never seen you before. Your participation in the fact that you seem to be like right in the middle now.
Absolutely.
I'm seeing you at meetings. You're not hesitating to go out to eat afterwards. You're very amenable to whatever the group is doing, and you You do service work for the groups, and you're at a meeting virtually almost every day, I guess. Huh?
Absolutely.
And your sponsor he's become that kind of man too. So I've been able to see both of you grow in that way.
Absolutely.
So you've been here for the last 3+ years, and typically what I do is I take people back and we talk about what it was, what it was like, what happened, and certainly what it's like now. What it's like now, in other words, from today back to the point at which you finally came back into AA for, let's hope, the final desireship. How do you feel about the overall state of your sobriety right now, given what you've done in the past 3 years?
My sobriety is pretty solid, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I always feel like I can enhance my conscious contact with a higher power.
Yeah.
I did a little New Year's resolution thing with some of the people I work with, and in process groups. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the year, I said, all right, what's one thing you can enhance in your life, and what's one thing that you can enhance in your program? And for me, my program was, need to stick with the daily meditations. I need to enhance my meditation and my prayer. If I can improve on anything, it's really a conscious contact throughout the day with my higher power, not just 5 minutes in the morning with some prayers, but spending more time in that daily meditation and enhancing that contact. So, because I don't know about you, but from time to time I wax and wane on is everything going to be okay? Is my higher power got my back? Is it going to turn out the way it's supposed to turn out? And am I okay with the way it's going to turn out? Because I'm still always wanting that result to be my way.
Well, in looking back, I've yet to find any occurrence in my life, going back all the years, where God has not been part of the equation or the solution. And so his box score, whatever you want to call it, is 100%.
Right.
And yet going into the next thing that might require the letting go to God, I still think it's not going to work out. It's like you've won every single race you've ever run, and yet you're still going into the next one thinking you're going to lose. My biggest challenge spiritually is to be able to stop during the day at any point and just acknowledge, okay, God, you got this. If I get off the phone with somebody and it's been a particularly enriching call, the very first thing I say is, thank you, God. I say that after every interview. Before I go in, I say, put the words in my mouth and in my mind and let my heart direct those words. Because you notice I don't have any script. There's no scripting here. This is all about heart to heart. The thing I love about your sobriety and watching you stay sober is that there is a marked difference between you now and you then. And it's a real joy to see it. Now, you're sponsoring some guys right now, aren't you?
I've got a handful of guys.
A handful of guys. What's that been like for you?
Oh, it's been fabulous.
Yeah.
It's, working with others is the real buzz.
The real buzz.
In the program. And it is. I mean, it's what keeps the momentum alive in the program.
Yeah.
It's what keeps me going back through the steps. I did not do that well in my go-rounds. Not that it would have made a difference, I think, but it is a requirement. We have to work with others in order to keep the program fresh. It's what fills the hole in your soul. That's really what makes you feel good. Not just staying sober doesn't make you feel good, but working, being a helpful, useful member to my wife, to others in the program. That's the stuff I didn't get before.
It's about enriching our lives through that process. And what you've talked about on this episode is the things that were missing before have been found in this period of sobriety for you, especially the service work, the sponsoring, being of service to other people. And you can always tell the quality of a man's sobriety by looking at the guys he sponsors and by the guys those guys sponsor. And I know some of the guys you sponsor, and they are really, comparing how they were when they came in to how they are today, it's amazing. You can see the light in their eyes.
Yeah, they're all doing great. Along the lines of what you just said, one of the biggest differences that I think is the Big Book. When I read the Big Book my first 2 times, I had no idea what it was saying. I really didn't connect with it at all.
Sure.
Until I got to that place of desperation. And then when I read it, it was like, yeah, man, that's how I felt. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
So I really was able to relate and connect with the big book this time. And that makes a difference when you're working with a sponsee, because you read it again and again and again. And how can you explain what some of it means to a new guy if you don't feel it or understand it yourself?
Yeah.
And this time I got it. Back in previous go-rounds, it was like, this is an antiquated language. I had no idea what this guy's talking about. A car dealer putting milk in his whiskey. I mean, what does this have to do with me? But the insanity of that guy's thinking before he did it, I felt that way, and I get it now.
It's like Chuck C's new pair of glasses. And I find that whenever I read the big book, and, I've done the Big Book podcast, and part of that, the most interesting part of that was getting to go through the stories that never made it into the third and fourth editions, because a lot of those stories involved men and women who were contemporaries of Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob. And these were stories about people who got sober back then. And those are some really antiquated stories, but the power behind them is as fresh as today. It's just amazing to know that the people whose guidance we are following had at most, when they wrote that book, 3 or 4 years. Blows my mind.
Right.
So to me, it's one of God's greatest gifts to mankind.
Absolutely.
Without a doubt. Well, this has really been terrific, just spending some time with you tonight and hearing your story and seeing the gifts. I'm assuming these gifts are carrying over into your personal relationships at home and at work.
Yeah. My wife and I are better than ever.
Oh, that's great.
We go to Chapter 9 meetings together.
Oh, great.
And, whereas we were two ships that passed in the night before, we are on the same team again, working towards a common goal.
Oh, that's cool.
Personal recovery for both of us.
I get it.
And we're doing better.
Well, I'm so glad that that's worked out for you. And I'm glad that you were able to do this. And I just want to say I love you. You're a good man. And it means a lot to me that you would do this. Somewhere, someplace, there's somebody who may hear this, and it may make a difference in their life. The value of even doing this is if one person can be helped, our job is done.
That would be a great gift.
Pretty much, so.
And I appreciate you still being around, man.
Yeah, well, I am.
You're still here, and thanks.
I'm still here, and again, many thanks, Brent.
It was my pleasure, man. I'm glad we did it.
I am too.
Well, my friends, that's a wrap for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. Thank you for tuning in. If you've enjoyed the interviews in this podcast series, please share it with others. This show is another helping hand of AA we can all extend to alcoholics everywhere. If you want to contact me directly with any comments, questions, or suggestions, simply email howard@aarecoveryinterviews.com. Please also take a minute to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the YouTube Music app. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs, and no one receives financial gain from the podcast. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA, that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.